Okay. So I said the what happens after labour power has been sold, that is, how labour power is used, is not a fixed quantity. It's something changed continually by capital. What I've skated over here, and Marx skates over a bit in Capital, is that the terms, exact terms of the sale of labour power are also reshaped continually, because the value of labour power is, as Marx puts it, contains a historical and moral element as well as a physical element, unlike other commodities. There is a myth that Marx thought that capitalism would reduce workers' wages to physical subsistence. On the contrary, he polemicized strongly against that view. He pointed out that in his day, wages in Britain were about twice what they were in France or Germany, and wages in the USA were about twice what they were in Britain. And he used this fact to deride and refute people who said that there was an iron law of wages. He says there's no iron law of wages. In fact, there's a class struggle over wages, which Marx discusses not so much in Capital, but in a pamphlet called Wages, Price and Profit, which is a write-up of a speech he made in the socialist movement at the time. It's now available as a pamphlet, which I would urge you to read alongside Capital. In Capital, what he deals with at more length is the changes once the sale of labour power is completed. And the first thing he deals with is the length of the working day. When you sell your labour power, you sell it for a week or a month. You may have an agreement which says that your working week is so many hours, though I think most people today, if you look at your employment contract, it will have all the words about 36 hours or 38 hours or whatever, and at the end it will say, and to carry out whatever other duties may seem necessary to the employer. So there are a lot of people who have nominally 36 hours or 38 hours. School teachers like myself, we have a nominal number of hours, but not all our employers even sign up to it, and the number of hours that we do in practice is much longer. So the length of the working day is not fixed, and Marx deals with this by a long chapter in which he discusses the history of the working day. And he discusses it mainly through looking at the legislation about the working day. And for many centuries, from the 14th century in England onwards to the beginning of the 19th century, the laws about the working day are not what we would expect today. They are laws which to lengthen the working day, to insist that the working day should be longer than a certain length, to insist that workers should work longer hours. The reason why that's the case is that this is capitalism in its early development. It hasn't yet acquired the strength and the ingrained character that it can. There's what Marx calls elsewhere a dull economic compulsion for workers to turn up every day, work for a certain number of hours. Most workers will have come from a peasant background where you work incredibly hard at certain periods of the year, and other periods of the year there's not much to do, you don't work, where you don't work outside the hours of light. You find in the Middle Ages, apparently there was the name for Monday was Holy Monday, and that was because a lot of work at their formal day off was Sunday. A lot of construction workers, for example, building big cathedrals, which is one of the big workforces you would have, a lot of them wouldn't turn up on Mondays. There's legislation after legislation to increase the working day. Then in the 19th century this changes, and bit by bit you get legislation to reduce the working day. At first ineffectual legislation, and then legislation which actually has an effect. And why does this happen? It happens in the first place because the technologies of the 19th century give capitalists enormous scope to increase the working day. For example, you can work in artificial light, you can do night shifts, you have expensive machinery which you want to keep running continuously, so you want workers on this machinery all the time. For example, for centuries, probably thousands of years, the idea of ports working at night, unloading or loading ships at night, was nobody thought of it. Today, it's commonplace. Every container terminal has night shifts. It's very common for ships to be unloaded at night. Why? Because this is big, expensive equipment, and the cranes are expensive. There are penalties for getting things late, so they work all the time. So there's a pressure to increase the working day. And in the early years of the Industrial Revolution in England and in some other countries in the early years of industrialisation, you get working days of 14 or 16 hours. This is resisted by the working class, and Marx says this resistance is perfectly logical in terms of the bargain. The working day is flexible, but that means it can be pushed down as well as pushed up. And the workers' struggle forces a reduction in the working day. That tends to stick because up to a point it also conforms with the long-term interests of capital, because Marx says these very long working days were like farmers just growing crops year after year, exhausting their land. The capitalists were exhausting the workers, reducing their productivity, and the productivity of labour increased enormously when workers were able to win a normal working day. But the driving force in that was the class struggle of the working class. And Marx regards throughout the reduction of the working day, the winning of the working class of free time for itself, as one of the great central issues of the class struggle.